Hey, how you doing, YouTube? This is your boy Brogi Naric, back again with another episode of TV Aftermath. And in this episode, I'm going to give you my non-spoiler review of Watchmen. Season 1, maybe? The HBO series that dropped about a month ago. And before I get into it, if you don't want spoilers, check out the non-spoiler review on my IG page, my Instagram page. Link is in the description. And before we get further into this, I'm going to give you my grade of Watchmen. As a grade, it's going to be an A, a 10 out of 10. I love this show. It was alright, that was my grade for Watchmen on HBO, and I absolutely enjoyed this series. As I mentioned in my non-spoiler review, I'm a big fan of this comic. I love this. One of my favorite comics of all time. I used to love it, but I really enjoyed what Zack Snyder did with the Watchmen movie. I think he did the best he could in that time frame to try to recreate and redo damn near page for page what was in this book. And I respect him for that. And with this series, I feel the show did its best. Damon Lindelof and the people that worked on this show, he was the guy that developed this for TV. I feel he did the best he could to take what was established in the book and build upon it. And I think he built upon it in very interesting ways that feels very close to what the book is. Some people may disagree, and we're all able to do that, but I felt I could tell, just like with Zack Snyder, that both of these guys were fans of the book, and they also brought their own sensibilities of what they got from the book. And I'm just going to get right into it. So from the first episode, when the show opens up on the terrorist attack, the massacre of Greenwood, Oklahoma, which some people may know as Black Wall Street, which was a thriving black community back in the 1920s in Oklahoma that was destroyed by the white citizens in the area. The U.S. military played a role in it as well, and they massacred most of the people in the town. And the series starts off with that very true historical thing that happened, and I know that threw a lot of people off. A lot of people were just like, why are we talking about history in this series that focuses on a comic book that talks about history? I can't believe they would do something like that. And it was surprising to me as well that they went in this route, because I remember when this show was being developed, they was like, it's going to take place in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I noticed that they were hiring a lot of black actors in main roles, especially with Regina King and Lou Gossett Jr. and Yahya Abdul-Mateen, and I'm like, I wonder, are they going to mention Tulsa, Oklahoma? And lo and behold, they did, and I was surprised by that, and I thought they did a damn good job kind of bringing that into the forefront. And I know that threw a lot of people off, but the book itself focuses on a lot of historical things, both good and bad. One of those being, the Vietnam War, another being the Kennedy assassination. That's kind of in the background, things like that. So, yeah, it's believable that it's not out of place. Some people are like, oh, they're trying to force some. Look, the comic was political, the TV show is political. Just because you don't agree with what the world that they're showing doesn't mean that it's automatically bad or it's pushing some sort of agenda. But anyway, I just wanted to get that out of the way. Some of the things in this world, you got your character, Sister Knight, played by Regina King, who's your main character. Angela Abar, awesome. Love this character. She's a police officer, and she's a wife, and she has these kids. So in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the cops now, in the present day, 2019, the cops wear masks because I think it was like 3 years ago, in 2019, 3 years ago, the cops, it was a Christmas night, and it was this group called the 7th Cavalry, which is, as the show, one of the guys described them as, they're just the Klan with new masks. Those masks represent the character Rorschach from the original book, who wasn't a racist. He was very conservative, and he had a black and white view of the world, but he was the only person who exposed Adrian Veidt's hoax of him petting the alien in New York, which was going to convince the world to become one as opposed to potentially destroying each other between U.S. and Russia firing nukes. So anyway, the 7th Cavalry they're a radical group that latched on to the fact that Rorschach told the truth, and that's one of the reasons why they're wearing the mask. The show doesn't quite explain that as well, but that's the reason why they're wearing those masks. But then that's also kind of bullshit as well, because they don't really give a shit about Rorschach. They just are latching on to that, but they're also really racist. So there was a night called the White Night on Christmas. They attacked the police, and most of them died. The few that survived did stop being police, and then there was a new law passed that allowed the police to basically be that you cannot, like, so you cannot get a cop's information anymore. No more. You can't get badge numbers, and they're all isolated. They're hidden behind these masks. And certain cops who are like the detectives can add their own little twist to it, where they can be essentially mass superheroes or mass vigilantes. And Sister Night is Regina King's character. It's a lot to explain. I'm sorry, but she's her thing, and now all the cops wear masks. But also because one of the things that's different is the actor Robert Redford is the president. He's been the president for like 20 years, which is a nod to the comic where Nixon had been the president for like 4 terms and he was running for his 5th. And he's like the counterbalance to Nixon's ultra conservative America. His is now, Robert Redford's is now more liberal America. And one of the things that happens is there's stricter gun control. So a lot of people don't have guns. And so strict to the point where the cops can't use their guns. There's like a device where they can't pull the gun out of their holster unless it's okayed by someone at the station. And well, it's in their cars and they can't take it out unless it's okayed by the station. The show kicks off where there's a black cop who pulls over this white guy, and he's hesitant about whether he can trust this guy, but he notices that he has a connection to the 7th Cavalry, so he's like trying to get the okay to get the gun out, but the system takes too long to unlock the gun, and the guy shoots the cop knowing that the cop was about to attack him. So now the cops are all on edge trying to find out who shot this guy. He didn't kill him, but he damn near died, but who shot this cop. And then that's when you kind of see a turn on the whole cops breaking the rules, because it's like, well, it's bad when police in actual life breaking the rules on citizens, specifically black people, and being strong-armed and black people, but is it okay when the cops are strong, who are, well, they're all, black or white, whatever, but they're strong-arming, the alt-right, or they're strong-arming a group of racists, does that and taking their rights, does it play the same? Do you feel the same amount of injustice? Which I had to even look at myself at certain times. I'm like, there was a moment where they were interrogating them, and I'm like, yeah, this is fucked up, because they're like, it's like some Abu Ghraib shit, where they're like kidnapping them, they're putting bags over their heads, and one of the things is, if you're deemed as a terrorist, you don't have any rights. The First Amendment doesn't apply to you anymore, which is essentially how it is now, but in this show, they definitely get more into that. I'll talk about Don Johnson. So Don Johnson, I love the actor Don Johnson. I'm a big fan of Nash Bridges, and he's been on a tear. He's been coming back in movies, and he's been playing a lot of racists, and there's no difference in this show. He plays a racist. He's the chief of the Tulsa PD, and he starts off, he's this happy, he's like, yeah, he's like, I'm gonna get those sons of bitches, and he's hanging out with Angela and her husband, and he does a little bit of coke, and he like stops the group that they find of the 7th Cavalry, and then at the end of the episode, he's killed. He's hung by by a noose, and then this old man, Will, played by Lou Gossett Jr., who's there, and he calls Angela up and tells her like, hey, Chief Police is here and he's in trouble. She rolls up and sees the chief is dead, and there's this old black man in a wheelchair, and he's like, yeah, I'm the one that hung him up, and she's like that doesn't make sense. And I love the reveal that Judd was connected to the 7th Cavalry the whole time. When Angela finds out about him having the Klan robe hidden in a secret compartment in his closet, and she's like, she's just like dumbfounded, because she's been friends with this guy for the past 3 years, because it's been 3 years since the White Night attack, and they've gotten really close. But that was all a plan to get close to her, because there was something that was revealed to them that night of that attack, which I'll get more into that later. But the reveal that Judd was, not who he said he was, but I figured he was just going to be racist. I was not expecting him to be, A, connected to the 7th Cavalry, and B, connected to the group, the Cyclops, which I love the addition of this fraternal order, this secret sort of, imagine if you're not in the comics, but you're into the Marvel movies, imagine if Hydra, they're kind of like Hydra, but not quite as big. But they're, evil organization, but they're, super racist. and they're basically like an offshoot of the Klan, but they were called the Cyclops, and they do the little OK symbol, but it's like on your eye type of thing, that Cyclops eye. Very, like, once again, things that are relevant to today, but has that fantastical element. But I got to talk about my man Jeremy Irons. He plays Adrian Veidt, Ozymandias, and he was amazing. This was the best of the two live action portrayals. This is the best one because he felt more like the character. The guy in the movie was not that great because Snyder, from the moment you see him, you're like, bad guy. As opposed to this version, the way Ozymandias is played, he's played more like a jovial, kind of upright, good man, but then you realize he does some evil shit, and I like that. And Jeremy Irons was hilarious in this role. He's just so great. So the whole time you're watching the show, you're like, man, or if if you read the book, whatever, you're like, man, he's probably trapped in a prison by Dr. Manhattan as penance for him dropping the monster in New York and just killing 3 million people in order to trick the world. You're thinking, yeah, Dr. Manhattan came back and was like, you're going to pay for your crimes. But then you find out that, no, that is not what happened. In actuality, Dr. Manhattan left 30 years ago. He left to Europa, created life, created his own little civilization on Europa, which is the moon of Jupiter, one of the moons of Jupiter. He creates his own little Garden of Eden, basically. And he makes these sort of tadpole humanoid beings that are his Adam and Eve, that are based on these two British people who so Dr. Manhattan, when he was human, him and his father lived in Germany, and they were from a Jewish background, and they were escaping from the Nazis to come to America. And they made a stop in England where there was this rich family that was allowing immigrant Jewish refugees hang out at their house before they left to America. And the two people that owned the manor, he recreated his own Adam and Eve in those two people who were kind to him and saved him and told him to make something beautiful. He did make something beautiful, and as a promise, he made his Adam and Eve designed after them. So Ozymandias does a deal for Dr. Manhattan, and as sort of a reward for saving the world, because Ozzy tricks the world into world peace, but then he's running himself ragged because the world, even though he's tricked the world into world peace, the world is slowly trying to get back to the brink of death, and he's been doing his best to kind of keep the peace by dropping the squid rain throughout the world to remind people that, like, hey, aliens exist and they can pop up at any time, so we should be good. But he also wants the recognition and the admiration for being the guy who saved the world, but he can't because he killed 3 million people. You're going to jail. So he's also like, I want to be known for saving the world, but I can't let the world know that I saved it because I'd go to jail. And he's running ragged, and Dr. Manhattan tells him about Europa. So Dr. Manhattan, in exchange for helping him out, Dr. Manhattan sends him there. And it's not a prison. It was really just like, hey, yeah, you can live here. But Ozymandias, after being there for like a year, he realizes, this is not what I need either. Like, and I got to get the hell out of here. And I love the reveal that it's not a prison. It's just he's stuck there for 8 years because he's waiting on Lady True, who's another character played by Hong Chow, who's a trillionaire who took over Adrian's business, but we find out that she's actually Adrian's daughter, and I'll get more into that later. But he's stuck on Europa waiting for her satellite to come by, which takes 5 years. So he's stuck there for 5 years, coming up with a plan to get her to notice that he's on Europa by taking the bodies of the servants who are clones, and he flings them through a catapult. I mean, because Adrian is super smart, he builds this catapult, and he's like flinging them through the barrier, and then he takes the bodies and writes a message that says, "Save me, daughter," at the exact time where he knows the satellite's going to be coming through, so it snaps the picture. She sees it, then he's got to wait like another, year or two for the rocket to come to save him, and you basically find out this whole time he's not in prison. He's got this guy called the Game Warden who's like, trying to keep him in check, and you find out that Ozzy set all of this whole thing up as just a game, so Ozzy can have something to do in the 8 years it takes for him to get off there before he loses his mind. And that was a great reveal, where it's like the Game Warden is the original Adam of the Adam and Eves that he chose to be the guy to keep him in check. because so he wouldn't lose his mind, and he puts a mask on him, and he asked him like, was I a good adversary? And Ozzy was like, no, you weren't, but you made a hell of a show. That just, it's totally encapsulated how smart and how crazy Ozymandias Adrian is, and Jeremy Irons did an amazing job as that character. Let's talk about Will. Lou Gossett Jr. Goddamn, Lou Gossett Jr. plays Will. I was watching reviews and people were picking up on this. They was like, I think Will is Hooded Justice. Now, Hooded Justice was an old character within the Watchmen universe. He was the first person to wear a mask and be a vigilante in this world. And he's a minor character in the series. No one knows what he looks like. There's numerous ideas of who he was, who he could have been, and within the book, and also there's the series, one of the companion series, the Before Watchmen Minutemen story, where they kind of get a little more into his backstory as well. But nothing is 100% confirmed on who he was. In this show, they make it where Will Reeves, named after the famous black lawman and inspiration for the Lone Ranger, Bass Reeves. Will Reeves was a black man who was actually Hooded Justice, which is a change from the comic, because in the comic, they never say what he looks like, but it's heavily hinted that the man was white and he was German because he had a German accent, and they talk about how in the book he was a supporter of Hitler and the Third Reich until Pearl Harbor happened, but he was a supporter, so it's heavily inclined that he was a German guy, but they never 100% confirm it. They retconned it and showed that actually he was a black man who wore like white makeup around his eyes when he had the hood on his head to appear as a white guy. And I thought that was an interesting way of how to elevate that character. And you also find out that the little kid who survived the Tulsa attack was him. It was two kids, him and the little baby. They both survived and they become a couple later on. And he's a cop in New York, very much like the original Night Owl, who was a cop in New York. And they don't really hint if they ever came across each other, but he's a cop and he witnesses racial injustice. There's this guy named Fred who blows up a Jewish deli, and he arrests him, and that's when he first makes notice of the group Cyclops, which the guy told him beware of the Cyclops, and he tries to investigate and he gets attacked by his fellow police. They attempt to lynch him. They don't kill him, but it was like a warning symbol. As he's walking back home, there's a robbery in progress, and he breaks up the robbery. He pets the hood that they pet on him, which is a black hood. He pokes holes in it, pets it over his head, and stops the robbery. And then that kind of leads him, and his wife kind of talks him into, maybe you should, fight for justice. Since you can't really do it as a cop, why don't you do it as a vigilante? And that leads him to being Hooded Justice. And you find out then that ties into the whole thing with him joining the Minutemen. And one of the things they did keep, which might be confusing for some people, is the relationship that in the comic, the gay relationship between Hooded Justice and Captain Metropolis, which is in the source material, and they do keep it in the show. Only difference is he's a black man who's now married, but he's also in this relationship with Captain Metropolis. So it might have thrown some people off, like, why is the black guy gay? It's like, look, that was in the source material, but he wasn't gay in the comic, but they're keeping him this way, and they kept that in there. At first I was like, well, one of the things about the character that we know about Captain Metropolis is he's a huge racist. So I'm like, so is he dating a black guy? But then it's like, that does happen. Racist people date people outside of their races all the time, out of their race all the time. So I'm like, okay. So yeah, that's from the source material. We find all of this because Angela has taken these pills called Nostalgia, which is also a reference to the book. It was a perfume called Nostalgia, and this is pills, and it makes you remember your memories. And she has her grandfather's pills, and she takes them all so she doesn't get arrested because she gets exposed. And so she's like kind of ODing and tripping on his memories. It's the young Will, and then at times it changes into Angela because she's inside of his memories. But I love the moment where he attacks, he runs up he's trying to get help, and the minute Cat Metropolis is like, nah, I'm not gonna send the group there. You're tripping, because he discovers that the Cyclops has this plan where they have these film projectors, and they're going to use the film projectors they put them in black theaters, and it causes the citizens to be hypnotized and causes them to fight each other. and there was this riot where the black people in the theater attacked each other, and he realizes that this is connected to Cyclops, but no one believes him, so he goes in and he shuts them down. Well, he shuts up that branch down, and he takes one of his projectors. That was episode 6. Great episode. And then, yeah, he loses his family because his wife was like, look, I'm tired of you being so angry. I'm tired of you cheating on me. I think she doesn't mention the cheating, but she knows it's going on. And then also he's kind of rough with the kids, so they break apart. And that's why he's her great-grandfather. And Angela doesn't know anything about this man because her father... And that goes into Angela's story, but her story is rough too. But I like how they basically took the Hooded Justice character from the comic and added another character called John Henry from the DC comic New Frontier, who was a black man who was survived the lynching from the Klan. He wore a black hood and he had these big ass hammers and he fought the Klan in the South. And it's like they took that character and kind of meshed him with Hooded Justice to make this new character. And I like the idea of him, you know, standing on his principles in terms of fighting against evil, because he's a black character he's not like against white people, he's against racism. So he's not like, oh, the white man this and the white man that, cracker ass crazy. He's not doing all of that. He's just like, look, these specific group needs to fucking go. And I like that they didn't, and he's a hero, you know, he's a hero, and I like that they didn't turn him too cartoonish with that. I'll get into Lady True right now. So Lady True, Vietnamese lady, she's a trillionaire, because trillionaires exist in this world. She's a trillionaire, and she runs Adrian Ozymandias, Jeremy Irons' character's company. Basically, you find out she took his company because he went missing, and we find out the reason. She's the smartest woman in the world, because Ozymandias, Adrian Veidt, was known as the smartest man in the world. She's like, I'm the smartest woman in the world, and she's also his daughter. Now, as Ozzy points out, he's like, I've never given myself to a woman. He's like, because he's obsessed with Alexander the Great, and that was one of Alexander the Great's methodologies, is not to be with women, so he did the same. And you find out that her mom used to work for Adrian Veidt, which was also from the comic, where he took a lot of Vietnamese refugees during the Vietnam War and hired them as workers for him. And her mom was one of the workers, and before he unleashed the monster on the earth, she broke into his office, hacked his, broke his password, and got some of his semen and inserted it in her, and then had her kid. And her kid, thankfully, happens to be just as smart, if not smarter, than Adrian Veidt. And she tells him, she's the one that tells him before, probably I think a year before Dr. Manhattan appears to Adrian, like, hey, Dr. Manhattan is not on Mars, he's actually on Europa. And because she sent out the signal and saw his signature there, and that's why she was sending the satellite, which would take 5 years to get to Europa, which is how Adrian knew to time it so he could send the photos would send back to her to let her know that, hey, help me out, I'm stuck on Europa. And he disowned her from that point, and because she was asking him for money, because she had this idea to steal Dr. Manhattan's powers. Because one of the big things about this series, you have the two groups. You have the 7th Cavalry, who's part of Cyclops, who are being led by Judd, and then the character Joe Keane, who is the son of Senator Keane from the comic, who wrote the Keane Act, which outlawed the mass superheroes. He's his son, and he's part of Cyclops, and he wants this. Both of them want to steal Dr. Manhattan's powers. The Cyclops want to steal it because America is no longer a white man's country. They had to apologize too much. They had to get rid of their guns. They're tired of Robert Redford and his bullshit. So they want to take the power of Dr. Manhattan and make America great again, in their view. Then you have Lady True, who wants to take the power of Dr. Manhattan and actually fix the world. You know, get rid of world hunger and fix the hole in the ozone layer. Stuff like that. You know, things that Dr. Manhattan could have did, but because he has these powers, but he chose to do nothing. And that's kind of the interesting thing about, like, yeah, Dr. Manhattan, you're like a god. Why didn't you do more? You could have done more. And I like how the two opposing ideologies want his powers for their own needs. She has designs for this device to take his powers, but she needs like $44 billion. And Adrian's like, I don't believe you're my daughter, and if you are my daughter, I don't care. I was born with money, I gave it away, and I've turned myself into a billionaire to prove that I was extraordinary on my own. And if you think you're all that, you're going to have to do it yourself. That essentially spurs her on to prove to her, not only to herself, but to her dad, that A, she can do it on her own, and she's smarter than he is, and so she's kind of you know, it gave her a little more oomph to prove herself that she can do this, and it would take, you know, a span of 10 years in order for all this stuff to coincide with each other. But Lady True was a great character, and then there was also that weird stuff with her daughter, who was a clone of her mom, which was interesting. And like I said, cloning is all over the place in this world. Angela, Virginia King's character, her backstory. She, in this world, Vietnam, the country Vietnam, since Dr. Manhattan won Vietnam, Vietnam is now the 51st state. Her father was in the military, and she was born in Vietnam. And her parents, it was the celebration of the end of the Vietnam War, and her parents died in a bombing that was an anti-USA attack, and her parents died in that, and she grew up in an orphanage. Then her grandmother comes from Tulsa to Vietnam to pick her up when she's like 6 or 7. This was the one thing that really pissed me off in the show. After she has this enjoyable moment trying to connect with her grandmother, and we also find out the origin of the Sister Night thing. It's a blaxploitation movie called Sister Night, and that was the inspiration for the name and the costume Sister Night. So she's like, we're going to go back to America. They put her in the cab. The grandmother's walking to the other side so she can get into the cab, has a heart attack in the middle of the street. I was so mad. I was like, come on. Like, this little girl can't get nothing right. So her life is just shit. That pissed me off. So anyway, she grows up. She's a cop in Vietnam. And then out of the blue, literally, Dr. Manhattan appears on, it's like, you know, years later, she's an adult, and it's the anniversary of her parents dying, and Dr. Manhattan walks into a bar and meets Angela Abar, and he basically tells her he's in love with her, and they're destined to be together because Dr. Manhattan can see through time at all times, which I love how they depict that. They do a great, just as well as they did in the movie, they depict his whole, he's in the present, but he can talk to the future and the past all at the same time. Great stuff. And also, yeah, the reveal that her husband, Cal, is Dr. Manhattan in a disguise by the end of that episode was episode 7, where she takes a hammer and bashes his head open. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on? Then she pulls out this ring device, which you find out he got from Adrian, which allows him to have amnesia, so he doesn't realize who he is, because him being able to see through time was kind of interfering with his relationship, which interfered with his other relationships, because he's grown, he realizes, hey, if I'm going to be in an actual relationship, I need to fix this, and to make it more enjoyable for the person with me. That's why he gets that device from Adrian, who he had the whole time. That was his plan A, but he decided to use plan B, which didn't work. They fall in love together, and then like she comes up with the idea of like, hey, you need to look like a regular person if we're going to be out in public. And so that's when they found the cadaver, which is the black guy Cal, and he takes his look, and they are together, but then he gets the device, and they stay together for 10 years, and he's like, hey, we're going to be together for 10 years, so then after 10 years, it's going to go bad, and I'm going to die. And she's like, whatever. So like, at first she's like, I don't believe you, but then it plays out. And abdul-mateen as Dr. Manhattan, I thought he did a damn good job playing that role. And especially for the limited budget that this show has, his look, I was fine with his look. I preferred it when he was glowing, but I know they can't keep the glow going on, because I prefer his glow, got the white eyes. It's not as great as the look from the movie. The movie's look, he looks dead on, like he's from the comic, and he even has that little blue design around his eyes, which this version doesn't. But I liked the attempt, and I liked how it worked in the show. And I also liked the blue makeup. It does look weird when you see it, but it's like that's the point of Dr. Manhattan. He's supposed to stand out and look weird. One of the things that I liked more in the show than was the movie was like when he glowed, he wasn't like super bright. Like he was bright, but he wasn't as bright as he was in the movie. I thought that was one of the things about the look. He was like way too bright in the movie. Other than that, I loved his portrayal of Dr. Manhattan. Then there's the paradox, because Angela's trying to figure out why did Will was the one who killed Judd, and which we find out at the end he used the Cyclops projector technology to mind control Judd into hanging himself. And Angela is trying to talk to Manhattan when he's trying to get his bearings, because he's been, amnesia for 10 years. He's trying to figure out what's going on in the world because he was, he didn't know. And she's like, hey, if you're talking, because he's in the past in New York talking to her father because he's now her grandfather and he's living in Captain Metropolis's mansion or whatever because he left it to him when he died. And Dr. Manhattan's talking to him like, hey, I'm talking to your granddaughter, Angela. And he's like, who's that? And he's like, you have a granddaughter named Angela. She needs your help in the future. And I'm talking to her now in the present. And then she's like, well, ask him, why did he kill Judd Crawford? And then he's talking to him in the past like, well, Angela wants to know, why did you kill Judd Crawford? And how did you know he was a part of Cyclops? And her grandfather's like, I don't know who Judd Crawford is, but now that you told me he's a part of Cyclops, I'm going to kill him. And so Angela realizes, he tells her like, oh, he doesn't know who Judd Crawford is. And then she's like, oh shit, did I start all of this? Because she basically makes a paradox. That was awesome. There's another for Lori, who is the original Silk Spectre. She's an FBI agent, and she takes over the Tulsa PD trying to figure out who killed Judd Crawford. I love the moment where she pieces together the whole Will killed Judd thing by listening to Angela when she's in a coma, in her trance, and she's talking out loud. She pieces it together, and she goes to Judd's wife and it's like, your husband was killed by Angela's grandfather because he thought your husband was connected to this racist group called Cyclops. Could all be a misunderstanding, but then he could also be connected to Senator Keene, and they might be trying to do some weird plan to try to get Senator Keene to cause his own homegrown terrorist group, and he can use them to help him get into the White House. And then the wife is like, well, that was the plan, but then we realized the White House is just so small. Lori's sitting in a chair, and she pulls out this device, and she's pointing at the chair, and Lori's like, what are you doing? And she hits another button, and then like the chair kind of sinks down a little bit, and Lori's still sitting there like, what the hell? Did she hit the button again? And then it drops out, and you realize she had a trap door inside her house. And I love that moment where Lori was chained up, and she's like, who the hell builds a trap door in that house? That was one of the funnier moments in the series. Another character, Looking Glass. I love his backstory, where Looking Glass was a Jehovah's Witness back in 1985, which is a reference to the comic, which I forgot about, because there were these Jehovah's Witnesses who were popping up in New York who were trying to tell people, like, hey, the end of the world is coming. And I guess he's somewhat connected to that group. But he was in Hoboken, New Jersey, and he's at, I guess, not Coney Island, but Jersey Shore or whatever. And he's at this fair, and he gets tricked by this girl. She gets him to strip down naked in the Hall of Mirrors. And then immediately after that happens, that's when the squid dropped in New York and caused the big explosion / psychic blast. And he was, in New Jersey, and he felt the after effects, the aftershock of that. He gets out of the Hall of Mirrors and everyone's dead, and he's like, what the fuck happens? And that traumatized him. And I think it also kind of gave him sort of a superpower to a degree, somewhat like Ozymandias, who's like super fit, but he's super smart, but he can also like catch bullets. Looking Glass has the ability to tell when someone is lying to him. He can see the little short changes in someone's physically where he can tell if they're lying or not. And that's why he's also the interrogator for the police. He has the device called the pod, which Lori calls basically a racist detector, or at least that's how they use it. So they can tell who's part of the 7th Cavalry or not. And he was cool, and he's also like very paranoid because he's like, the aliens exist. There's, aliens coming through different dimensions. Got to be prepared. There's this company that gives out all this devices. Like there's like a warning system for when there's another squid drop. There's this thing called Reflectotine that like reflects psychic attacks, and he wears it in his mask. He wears it in his hat because he's always paranoid about when another attack is going to happen. And then when he's revealed, he gets tricked by the 7th Cavalry, and they tell him that it's all bullshit. He is like, he's crushed. He's crushed, but he doesn't like fly off the handle. Like he's crushed to find out that his whole life he's been living in fear of nothing. But he doesn't go off the handle. He's not like, he looks like Rorschach, but he's not Rorschach. And I like that he's his own character. He's crazy, but he's not crazy like Rorschach is. So I like that they kept him sane. He still seems like an actual functioning normal person. And Tim Blake Nelson did a great job as that character. The American Hero Story, that was funny. American Hero Story is a show within the show where it's a retelling of the history of the Minutemen, which was the first super team that existed in this world. And it's kind of a low-key dig at Zack Snyder's movie, because like the show is like super dark, super gritty, super violent, and like the action sequences in the show are very much slowed down, and the punch, whenever someone gets a punch in the face and there's blood flying all over the place, and in slow mo and all, it was great. And it was funny how that popped up. Oh, reparations, which is like sort of like reparations, which people are legitimately trying to get in the world today. In this fictional world, the people who were the descendants of the people who were attacked in the Tulsa massacre can apply for reparations, and they can get, you know, government subsidies from money from the government as sort of like an apology for this attack. The cavalry captured Dr. Manhattan, and they want to. Senator Joe Keane wants to turn into Dr. Manhattan, and it doesn't work because they're not as smart. And it was also a trick by Lady True. She let them capture him, and then when they turned the machine on, it teleported them to her area where she was going to absorb his power. And Keane died because the process wasn't. He didn't have the centrifuge to refine the energy, so he just exploded. And Lady True, and she was working with Will, and Will was like, "Hey, if you help me, I can help you get Dr. Manhattan, and if you kill Cyclops or me, you know, it was mutual benefit." So she's got Dr. Manhattan, and she uses her little laser devices to kill the leadership of Cyclops. And Lady True was about to use the machine to absorb Dr. Manhattan, but before she could do that, he teleported Lori, Looking Glass, and Adrian away through the blood, because the blood spilled out of Senator Keane. He can't use his powers while he's in the cage, but he can transfer them through the atoms of the blood to affect the people outside. So he teleports them away to Karnak, which is Ozymandias' hideout in Antarctica, and he leaves Angela there because he didn't want to be alone, which is another thing. Like, John has definitely gotten more human than what he was. So he's like, I'm afraid. Like, I rarely have I felt afraid since the 50s when I became Dr. Manhattan, but he was afraid now. Even though he knows he's going to die, and he wanted Angela to be there because that's, you know, his wife. He wanted her beside him. So Adrian, who was also upset at Lady True because she called him, even though he was smart, his first idea was smart, but it's just a rerun. You've been doing the same thing over and over, which is squids popping up every so often. That's to remind people she wants to do something different. That's why she wants to take Dr. Manhattan's powers, which is also kind of a nod to people who might complain, like, why is the show so different? It's like, well, we've done this, we've done the book, we've done the movie, I'm doing something different. And I like once again, I like the direction he took it in. So Adrian is like, I'm going to use the squid rain to take out her device, but he gets Looking Glass to change the temperature, so thus freezing all the little squids, and by dropping at that altitude, it'll be like a Gatling gun dropping down on them. So they drop the squids. Lori tries to call Angela, which there's like these booths throughout the world where you can talk to Dr. Manhattan, and uses that to get to Angela, like, get cover quick. So she's running under the squids and it's destroying everything, and it wrecks her device, which then falls on top of her and kills her. And Dr. Manhattan has already been transferred into energy, and he's gone. So Angela runs to the movie theater, which was the same movie theater that her grandfather was as a kid, and that was destroyed, and he's hiding out there in the theater with her children. Things, you know, they save the day. They stop Lady True from taking Dr. Manhattan's powers. Cyclops is dead, and Adrian's like, all right, this is great. You guys can use the owl ship to fly back to America and leave me the hell alone. And then Lori's like, oh wait, no, you're coming with us. You killed 3 million people. You're going to jail. And then he's like, wait a second. If you do that, that would leave the world back into chaos. And she's like, you know, everyone talks about the world is going to end, but it hasn't happened yet. So you're going to jail. And he starts to talk, and Looking Glass knocks him upside the head. So he's going to jail. Angela's hanging out with her grandfather, and he mentioned something about the eggs, which was a reference to when Dr. Manhattan and Angela first met. And she realizes there's an egg left because he was making waffles. Eggs cracked. There was an egg left. And when they first met, Dr. Manhattan tells Angela he could give his powers away, meaning he could copy his atoms, put it into an organic item, someone would eat that organic item and then they could gain his powers. And so Angela realizes there's this egg left, and she remembers when he says that. So she goes out to the pool, because there's a whole reference about him walking on water. She cracks the egg, eats the egg, and then the last shot of the show is like her foot coming down on top of the water, and then it cuts away, and then we don't know if it worked or not. And I like that cliffhanger, and like I said in my non-spoiler review, I don't need a second season of this show. I think they did a damn good job. Just leave it on that cliffhanger. Because I don't really know where they can go with another. Because if you go another season, I don't see what they could really do to advance anything. Like, they've done a good enough job. Just leave it alone after this. As much as I love this cast and the acting, it's like, just leave it alone after this and leave it on that cliffhanger. But yeah, love this show. I'm gonna stop talking now. I talk too much. Check out the series if you can. If you like this video, hit the like button, share, subscribe. Check out other videos on this channel. Watchmen, watch it. Don't listen to all the haters. Go into it blind, read the book, then watch the movie, then watch this show. I don't care. Just check out Watchmen. It's a great series. Check it out. It's worth checking out. It's definitely dated, but get through it. It's good shit. That's all I have to say. Thanks for watching. Peace.